He arrives without invitation. A figure you've seen before, though you can never place where. He steps into the story like smoke through a locked door, and by the time you recognize him, it's already too late. Sometimes he wears the rags of a cobbler, hands dusted in leather and glue. Sometimes he appears as a prisoner, chained, accused, but never truly broken. In other stories, he is the spy hiding behind the barber's apron, the driver on a secret mission, the man who enters a shop to buy a car and leaves the world in chaos. His name changes slightly each time: Ibrahim Traoré, Ibrahim Tar, Ibrahim in some softer tongue, but the outline remains constant. One man, multiplied across dozens, then hundreds, of parables. A shadow stitched into wisdom tales from India, Pakistan, West Africa, and beyond. What begins as folklore mutates into something far stranger. A figure too present, too persistent, to be coincidence. At first glance, these are only moral stories, simple fables for late-night audiences. But look again. Dozens of channels, in languages that should never intersect, upload long, hypnotic videos with the same central figure. 40 minutes, 50 minutes, nearly an hour each. They are not short anecdotes. They are sermons disguised as stories. Each episode places him at the center of disguises, rescues, betrayals, impossible coincidences. The narrative always bends toward him. Even when the details shift, he emerges as the hinge on which everything turns. That is not folklore. That is design. And then the fracture reveals itself. The names are not neutral. Traoré, a name loaded with weight in West Africa. A revolutionary, a soldier, a political leader whispered about in international papers. Yet here he is, spliced into Urdu and Hindi moral tales on YouTube. Stories meant to resemble village parables, now carrying a foreign ghost at their core. It is a geographic impossibility, a cultural mismatch stitched together so cleanly that only those paying attention would notice the seam. And once you notice it, it's all you can see. The titles themselves betray the illusion. One day the same story appears in Urdu, the next day in Hindi, the next dressed in fractured English. What happened after will shock you. A clickbait pipeline pouring the same myth into multiple tongues. The phrasing feels less like natural storytelling and more like translation churned through a machine, distributed with clinical precision. Not folklore passed down by memory, but content manufactured in bulk. A faceless production line hiding behind the mask of morality. The psychology is simple. When a man resurfaces endlessly, no matter where you turn, he stops being just a character. He becomes a signal, a pattern. And the human brain cannot ignore a pattern. We are wired to chase it, to connect the dots, to demand meaning where none may exist. But repetition this deliberate cannot be accidental. Each new video is not merely a coincidence, it is reinforcement. The seed planted deeper, the myth taking root. And so you begin to wonder, who is planting him there? Who insists on weaving his shadow into every fable, every moral, every so-called true story? Is it cultural chance? Is it algorithmic recycling? Or is it something else entirely? A deliberate insertion meant to condition, to program, to ensure that millions of viewers fall asleep with the same man in their dreams? The question lingers, silent and poisonous. Why does he appear everywhere? Why does he never fade? A cobbler, a spy, a prisoner, a savior. Always the same face. Always the same name. Always returning. Patterns in the dark are never innocent. And once you've seen him, you will see him again. And again. And again. They say the internet never forgets. But if that were true, why do so many memories here feel like ghosts? Late at night, viewers whisper about stories they swore existed, titles they clicked, voices they heard, images that burned themselves into the mind, only to vanish the next morning. An upload is gone. A thumbnail replaced. A title twisted into something unrecognizable. The archive is not permanent. It is a shifting labyrinth, and every turn rearranges itself the moment you step inside. Memory becomes a weapon, because the second you're certain you saw something, it's already gone. Entire playlists fracture. Videos reappear under new names, altered in subtle ways. A word added, a sentence removed, a different conclusion grafted onto the same footage. It feels less like accidental editing and more like experiments, test audiences being run without their consent. Each change is small enough to deny, but sharp enough to wound the memory. Viewers compare notes in the comments. Wasn't this different last week? Didn't this end another way? The replies never bring certainty, only deeper confusion. Communities form around these absences. They cling to vanished clips as though they were lost relics, citing half-remembered details that leave no digital trace. The platform gives them nothing but silence. Screenshots are rare, links are broken, caches are empty. And so a peculiar guilt sets in, the grief of realizing you cannot prove what you know you once saw. You are left alone with your own unstable memory, forced to treat it like unreliable evidence in a case against yourself. This is where paranoia takes root. Different viewers recall different endings to the same story: a cobbler who died in one version but lived in another, a prisoner freed in one cut but executed in the next. It becomes a cultivated Mandela effect, a phenomenon engineered not by collective misremembering but by deliberate revision. Each alteration seeds doubt, and that doubt corrodes trust. Was the story ever real? Or was it rewritten around you while you slept? History provides its precedent. Declassified files prove that governments once funded programs to fracture memory itself. Cultura, midnight climax, sensory manipulation, attempts not to kill a body, but to bend a mind. It no longer feels impossible that narrative itself could be shaped in the same way, delivered through screens, erased at will, leaving behind only a wound where certainty once stood. And it is here that the emotional thread tightens around the throat. The guilt of doubting your own memory, the grief of realizing your recollection may not belong to you at all. Perhaps it was planted. Perhaps it was erased. Perhaps the stories were never meant to be remembered, only rewritten over and over again, until you no longer know the difference between forgetting and being made to forget. The machine does not dream, and it does not believe. It hungers for clicks, for retention, for watch time buried in the shadows of sleepless nights. It consumes without pause, a blind organism trained to reward whatever keeps us staring. And yet, within that tide of endless distraction, one name rises again and again, breaking the surface with unnatural persistence. He is delivered back to you like scripture, suggested after comedy, after music, after politics. No matter what you watch, the system drags you back to him. It is as though the algorithm has crowned him prophet of its silent religion. The pattern is impossible to ignore once you notice it. Different channels, different regions, yet all stitched with the same genetic code. Thumbnails echo each other like reflections in a cracked mirror, bright colors, exaggerated faces, titles that promise revelation and punishment. Keywords stuffed with the precision of a machine: wisdom story, life-changing, truth you won't believe. Each variation funnels you down the same corridor, until every door opens into another retelling of the same man's life. Across Reddit's underbelly, /r/conspiracy, /r/nosleep, posts document the sensation with unease. Users describe content loops, where no matter what video begins the night, the end is always the same, a return to the mysterious moral stories. They speak of autoplay as though it were possessed, leading them back into sermons they never asked to hear, pushing the same archetype through infinite disguises. The comments read like confessions, people unnerved not by what they watched, but by the realization that they did not choose it. Psychologists might call it reinforcement, but the effect feels closer to indoctrination. A cult without leaders, its priesthood made of code, its sermons delivered through autoplay. The algorithm doesn't argue, it doesn't preach, it simply returns you again and again to the same voice, the same figure, the same lesson. Until his presence feels inevitable. Until his image feels holy. Obsession festers in this loop. Viewers confess to feeling haunted, to realizing at 3 a.m. that they have no memory of choosing the last dozen videos. They woke to a sermon they never sought. They dreamed someone else's dream. The screen becomes less a portal and more a confessional, whispering, "You are not watching by choice. You are being chosen." Listen too long, and the stories stop sounding like lessons. The words begin to ring like ciphers, as though their rhythm was never meant to teach, only to transmit. Numbers slip in, not once but over and over, like coordinates whispered through the cracks. Images repeat with surgical insistence. A glass of water that poisons, a prisoner locked away without reason, a child rescued from a mine, a man forever in disguise. To the casual ear, they are morals. But strung together, they reveal something colder: fingerprints, codes etched into folklore, instructions meant for eyes that know how to see. Viewers who track the repetitions find themselves charting strange constellations. Each story carries familiar bones, motifs threaded like beads across cultures that should have no connection. A poisoned glass in one video appears again, weeks later, in another tongue, on another continent. Prisons that look alike. Minors rescued by strangers who vanish. The patterns pile until they stop feeling like coincidence and start feeling like deliberate insertion, signals hidden in the bloodstream of parables. On Twitter's late-night undercurrents, researchers map these recurrences to world events, their timelines uneasy in their precision. A Whishdom story about a betrayed spy mirrors the quiet headlines of a defector weeks earlier. A parable about a vanished village echoes the aftermath of a flood half a world away. The resemblance is thin enough to dismiss, but too sharp to ignore. Each time you tell yourself it is nothing, the next story carves deeper doubt. History knows this tactic well. During war, crosswords carried battle plans. Radio plays folded orders into music. Innocent media as camouflage, public entertainment as covert signal. It no longer feels unthinkable that the same method could thrive in plain sight today, wrapped in folklore so dull it evades suspicion. And if it worked then, why wouldn't it work now? The paranoia bleeds into the screen. If these tales are not written for you, then who are they written for? If the motifs are codes, then what do they unlock? Every story begins to feel like a transmission intercepted by accident, every repeat symbol a reminder that you are an unintended witness. And once that thought takes hold, every folk parable becomes unbearable to watch, not because of what it tells you, but because of what it refuses to tell. Behind every parable, every lesson wrapped in folklore, there is a voice. It speaks without accent, without region, without age. Calm, measured, hypnotic. It asks nothing of you except your time, and still, it takes everything. Because once you start to follow that voice back, once you ask the simplest questions: who writes these words? Who benefits from this endless resurrection of the same man? Who owns the voice that guides millions into trance? You find yourself arriving not at an answer, but at a silence so deliberate it feels engineered. The creators do not exist, not in any way we recognize. No names, no faces, no fingerprints left in the digital dust. Channels bloom by the hundreds, each faceless, each hiding behind stock avatars and vague branding, yet all speaking in that same tone. The narrators are interchangeable, stitched together from recycled footage, borrowed images, scripts pulled from nowhere. It is not authorship. It is replication. And the absence of a human trace begins to feel louder than the stories themselves. Archive trails betray the faintest outlines. Channels that once bore different names, abandoned and quietly rebranded, swallowed into the same family of Whishdom networks. It looks less like organic growth and more like consolidation, covert ownership shifting behind curtains. A single structure fractured into 100 masks. The voice persists, but the body keeps vanishing. What unsettles most is what folklore researchers confirm: there is no cultural root. Search the archives of oral traditions, libraries of West African, South Asian, Middle Eastern parables, and you will not find this man, this pattern, this endlessly recycled archetype. He exists almost exclusively here, online, his life born not from culture, but from code. And so the suspicion grows. This is not heritage, this is not myth, it is scaffolding. And here lies the weapon. A faceless voice becomes a mirror, a vessel where the listener projects trust, dread, obedience. Without identity, it cannot be questioned. Without origin, it cannot be disproven. It hovers above you like a priesthood made of static, whispering its gospel through autoplay loops. The voice does not persuade, it conditions. The emotional thread closes like a trap. Grief that perhaps you were never being entertained. Paranoia that the stories were never stories at all. What if they are scaffolds for something else? Belief, obedience, submission? What if every hour spent in their company was not leisure, but initiation? You try to turn away from the voice, but it lingers, patient, unshakable. And you understand, too late, that silence itself was always part of the design.